Hello and welcome. My name is Jamie Tracy, AP Studio Art teacher and director of the Visual and Performing Arts Pathway at Skyline High School in Oakland, California. This is our presentation in AP Art from my friend Demetri Broxton. We joined the conversation just a few seconds in. He's sharing with us about his education journey. And the purpose of these presentations is to connect our students and whoever chooses to check them out to creative careers. So enjoy and thanks for checking it out.
I didn't paint or draw or do all the cool stuff that you guys get to do until I got to college for the first time. After I graduated, and I guess also I should be like during college, I found out that you could study abroad. And so I took complete advantage of that. I spent a summer in the Caribbean. I went to Jamaica. I went to the Bahamas. Um, and I spent my senior year in college in Ghana, West Africa. And for me, that's where I really discovered myself as an artist and decided to make that really be a career move for me. I met my wife when I was in Ghana. She's American, but she's from Indiana, and she was studying abroad there also. And so after I graduated, I moved to Indiana to be there. And my very first job was at an art museum, and I loved it. I was an art teacher so for the museum, so I would take studio classes and I would bring them to schools, to public schools, and I also became the manager of the art studio. So I taught adults. So like the oldest person I got to teach a painting class was 89 years old. She thought she couldn't paint. It was really fun to teach her that anyone could paint. You just had to know a few steps to do it, and the rest of my story I kind of share with you as we go along. But I also am the director of education at Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco, so I run the education department there. I have been an independent curator, so that means I don't do it as a job, but I get contracts to work as a curator. And I had a role as an independent curator or contract curator with the city of Berkeley for 7 years, and I just ended that last January, so a year ago, um, doing public art projects there. And what else can I tell you guys that you would need to know? I am on a lot of boards. So if anybody is interested in museum studies, if you don't even know what museum studies are, what people in museums do, I sit on an advisory board for San Francisco State University. That's where I got my master's degree. Um, and yeah, and my job is to recruit diverse folks for the program. Um, and I also am one of the chairs of the Bay Area Emerging Museum Professionals. So I'm a museum nerd. I'm an artist. If anybody has questions about that, and I'll talk about curatorial work in my presentation. So, Mr. Tracy, I think I'll just jump into it.
Sounds good.
Okay, just give me 1 second. Cool. Ah, it jumped. That's okay. You don't need to see that anyway. Um, so I started off as an artist. I started off as a painter. And so this is an example of a painting. It's actually in my kitchen right now, that I did. Like I said a minute ago, I felt like when I went to Ghana, West Africa, I had a lot of freedom. Leaving the American context where Western art is the sole focus of how everybody thinks the best art is, to go to somewhere where the art history is very different, really opened me up into trying to figure out my expression through painting. And so, yeah, I don't really paint right now, but I just wanted to give you guys a couple of examples of that. After I graduated from college, I did work at a museum, like I told you guys, at the Indianapolis Museum of Art. And at the Indianapolis Museum of Art, they had these rooms that they did children's parties in. And so they had an open call for artists to submit proposals for the children's art room. And I submitted a piece that was inspired by a children's book called The Watering Hole. Maybe you guys know some of it, but anyway, it's like this tropical watering hole that dries up because of drought, and then it eventually comes back. My piece was not selected for the to be one of the murals to be painted within the museum space, and I was sad about it. But somebody who was on the selection committee contacted me right after the decision was made and said, "Oh my gosh, I love it. Can you please paint that in my son's room?" So I painted the mural for his son's room. It was really bright. I think the son was like 2 years old at the time. So it was really bright, had lots of animals in it, and something for him to look at. And after that, I started to get calls because he had friends. And so the friends, when you look online, there's not a lot of people who do murals. And this was before Instagram was even a thing. So, I started to get referrals. So I built a business, not even on purpose, painting murals. And so the one on the right is for someone the guy who did the original mural referred me to, who was really into football and into the Colts. And yeah, so I think I also want to show this, because when you paint murals, it's not really your artwork. You're painting what someone wants you to paint for them. Like I even had one that I just did flowers all over a wall. I hated it. But when you do murals, you have a client, and so you have to deliver what the client wants. It's not necessarily how you paint or what you're really interested in. And the last thing that I painted, the last mural that I did that kind of closed my business out for me, is this gigantic warehouse that I want to say it had 6 different rooms, and I painted the walls of every single room. It took me 3 weeks. I would go to work, and then I would immediately go and paint all night long until I finished this. I needed a lot of money because I wanted to move back to the Bay Area. I needed to pay for a U-Haul truck. I think it was like $1,000 or something like that. And I needed to also have a down payment for my first apartment back in Oakland. And so I knocked this out in about 3 weeks to be able to do that. It's a party company that does themed parties for children's birthdays. And so everything that was painted on here had something to do with one of their themes. And then when I moved back to Oakland, I was no longer in Ghana. So I think my color palette really changed. And I think and then the last class, I started to think about this, and I was like, oh yeah, I think this is actually true for me. I never get to think about my process and how I really worked, but I got really interested in investigating light and dark. And so all my work was really dark at that time, because, the darker that the dark is, the brighter the light. And I started to really get interested in messing with different, like Golden Acrylic brand has all of these different like modeling pastes and things that you can attach to your canvas to give it texture. So I got really interested in putting lots and lots of texture on my canvas, and then carving into the surface these vanishing point lines to just make the painting more three-dimensional. And so you can see that in there. It's like it's a very thick layer of material underneath the paint itself that then I carved into the canvas with the palette knife to then give it the texture. And I think for me, I was really interested in not necessarily painting, but trying to make a more three-dimensional space more than anything else. And I think this is the very last painting that I have done so far. This is a larger piece, and you can see there's those little squares with the like tree branches coming through, where I like screened out like these squares, and I built up the modeling paste even thicker to put something in. And I was really interested in the play of light, but I was also interested in three-dimensionality and what you could do with the materials that I could find at the art store to make it not so much a painting anymore. And I think I really wanted to move into sculpture, which is what I ended up doing more than painting. I've got this image on because for me, after I stopped painting, and also for me, a big part of why I stopped painting was because I had three kids at that point. And when you paint in oil or acrylic paint is really fast. If you guys have worked in acrylic, I don't know if you have done that yet.
Yeah.
You've done that. Yeah, it dries really fast, but oil takes hours to dry or days, weeks, even sometimes, depending on how thick you put it. Um, and so I also felt, and it's expensive. And so I felt like I always had to spend 3 hours minimum, even to just get my palette together to paint. And I felt bad because I was always leaving my wife with the kids to go off to the studio and I couldn't help around. So I started to investigate a different art form to be able to express myself. I'm an artist, and so I needed to be creative. I am half Filipino and I'm half African American, and so I was really interested in something that represented my culture, and beadwork is something that is present in both cultures. So on the left of the screen is traditional southern Filipino beadwork, where all the colors that they use represent their province, or or their specific culture. It also represents, whether you're married, whether you're a warrior, what your status is within society. So every single beat choice has a meaning. And then on the right side is the Oba, who is the ultimate king for the Yoruba people of Nigeria. And they use beads, I mean, they take it to a whole other level. All the Obas have these veils of beads that cover their face so that common people can't look into their eyes, because the belief is that the Oba he has the direct connection to the ancestors and the spiritual realm, and his spiritual power is so high that if you are a common person and you look into his eyes, you'll be burned. So the beads are seen as the only thing that can protect the common person from being burned by his gaze and going up in a ball of flame. So beads have like such a meaning, and for me, I wanted to investigate what I could do with this material that has so much cultural background and meaning for me. So I started making jewelry. So I think I was making it for family and friends for years. But I think about 2017, I really wanted to see if I could make a living off of making jewelry. So I made tons and tons of designs using just a needle and thread. And you can see on the left side a process of how I do it, where it's just rows of beads stitched together over and over and over again to make a design. This was inspired by, you can probably see like Egypt, and I think like Horus's wings is what I was inspired with making this piece. So not necessarily art, but it was infused with some kind of artistic thinking of some sort. And I'm happy to say that my jewelry all sold out, mostly by friends and family, but it all sold out. And after I did that last show with the jewelry, I realized like I went to school for art. I didn't go to school to be a jeweler. No shade against jewelers, but it wasn't what I wanted to do with myself. So I started to investigate what I could do to push the beadwork to be something that's a little more focused on art making. And so I started this is kind of probably the last thing that I did, where I just wanted to, again, just needle, thread, and beads and weave together something that was pictorial, that represented something. I ended up sewing this onto a hat, and it's my favorite hat that I wear all the time. But again, decorative and not necessarily art that you hang on the wall. And something that brought me to, I had a conversation with a friend of mine who's an artist, as well as the woman who is now my gallerist, to ask, I was just like, what could I do? I'm really interested in beads. It's not something that I see in the art gallery context a lot. What could I do? I have this idea, but do you think it could be viable for an art gallery? Like, would you show it? Do you think someone would buy it? And so the gallerist told me, hey, if you do it and I see it and I like it, I'll show it in the gallery. So I went for it. And when you're working with beads, unless you're gluing them down to a hard surface, so you have to use like industrial strength glue to glue them down, you have to sew them into something. And what I was doing was working with needle and thread. So to be able to sew it to something, I needed something soft. And I had a pair of boxing gloves sitting around, because I think I was going to take a boxing class or something that I never took. And for me, I started to think about like, well, what does boxing represent for me? The picture that you see of the man, that's my grandfather, who was really the most important man in my life as a child. He was in the U.S. military and was a boxer while he served. And so I was really interested in that. He would tell me stories about boxers. He was really into Joe Louis and Muhammad Ali, Jack Johnson, and all the old greats. And he would tell me about the pride of seeing a black boxer back when America was segregated. You had black boxers and you had white boxers, and they never mixed until Jack Johnson was selected to go for the heavyweight championship. And it became a source of pride for black people in America. And so I started to think about those, and that boxing is not just a sport, but it really represents my ancestry and who I am and the importance of that. So you can see the finished piece here. It also is covered in cowrie shells. Every object that I attach to the glove has some meaning. So during the transatlantic slave trade, human bodies were traded for glass beads from what was called Bohemia, is now the Czech Republic, and also cowrie shells from the Indian Ocean area. So there's like a formula for every pound of cowrie shells, you could buy 13 pounds of a human's body. So if you're 130 pounds, they would buy you for 10 pounds of cowrie shells, or 10 pounds of glass beads. And for me, I was listening to music, and this old 90s hip hop song came on where the woman, just, you probably heard it, keeps saying, I got the power, I got the power. And it stuck to me and was like, cowrie shells, beads, these are all things of power, like money that were traded for human bodies to go into slavery. And so I started to investigate what it means to have these things come together. And, boxing is really the physical manifestation of power, whereas these other objects like money are the material manifestations of them. And this piece right here is really special to me. That first piece that I showed, not only was I able to show in a gallery, but a collector bought it. And so it kind of propelled me. I was like, okay, I think I figured something out as an artist. When I was a painter, by the way, no one ever bought my work. I was a painter for over 10 years, never sold one piece. But the very first thing that I did with this, someone bought it. So I was like, okay, I must be doing something right. A guy named Jay Irving, who is a producer. He produces hip hop artists in LA. He is the grandson of oh my God, basketball player. Why am I totally missing it? He's the grandson of a famous basketball player, and so he had an inheritance, and so he decided to. I'm sorry.
Julius Irving.
Yeah, Julius Irving. Thank you, Dr. J. I don't know why that just blanked out for me, but he used the money from his grandfather to start a business where he gives artists all the royalties. So usually artists have to pay royalties and other people own their music. So he's a boxer, and he also has an art collection, and for him everything is black and white. So it was really nice to sit down with him and just be like, well, what are you into? My artwork always starts with a verse from a hip hop song, usually, for the most part. And, I thought of an artist that represents him. And so I immediately thought of Nipsey Hussle. And he has a song where he says, all I'm trying to do is hustle and motivate. And that line stuck with me. And I'm like, this represents you. And that became the piece. It also has quartz crystal and onyx points, because those have, I see my work as kind of like a prayer. It's a social message, but there's also a prayer. So each material choice that I make has a meaning. So it was like healing for him and grounding and guidance. I have this piece to just kind of show you that I also work on different materials, not just the boxing gloves, but really investigating boxers and their regalia of what they wear. So this is a robe. I always leave the everlast showing so folks can make the connection that it's a boxing robe. And it's got the phrase, I believe there's a God above me. I'm just the God of everything else. I'm really interested in the braggadociousness of hip hop records and how everybody is the GOAT or the God of rap. And it also connects to the Yoruba tradition of the Oba or the king being the most connected to God of anyone else. And I'm interested in how hip hop artists are constantly saying that. I also have worked on flags. I was watching the first Rocky movie and just kind of thinking about how the flag has been used, and then also thinking about in our recent history with Black Lives Matter protests. Thinking about the civil rights, how the flag always becomes a symbol of either unity or becomes, like we saw at the insurgents in Washington, D.C. 2 weeks ago, where the flag can also be weaponized. It can be a tool to divide people. And so I'm just really interested in flags, and then also the connection with boxing. So and Rocky comes out draped in the flag, and it becomes kind of his shield. It shows how American he is against his opponents who, one scene, it's a Black person who's seen as not as American as Rocky, or later in the Rocky series, it's him fighting against Russia, and how the flag becomes a symbol to represent the whole country that leaves a lot of people out of the narrative most of the time. And then, I got a question on the last one where on the right one, the black and white flag, the beads are also an off-loom. So this is not me attaching them or stitching them directly onto the fabric like I do. And I'll show you guys real quick. This is what I normally do. Hopefully you can see me. I usually use like an embroidery hoop, and I stitch directly onto, in this case, it's paper on one side, but fabric on the other side. And then that gets attached to the gloves. You can see that?
Did you make that flag?
I did not make the flags. No, I bought them. So the one on the left, the American flag, is like, I went on eBay and found like when a soldier dies, and someone who served in the military dies, the family gets this folded up flag. And so I found one of those. So yeah, it's all repurposed materials that I find. In the black and white one is what happened?
How old is it?
How old is? Oh, I have no idea. No one, it was kind of old. It was folded up, and it was actually fabric. So the new flags are made out of nylon. So this one's, probably 20 or 30 years. I have no idea, actually, to tell you the truth.
Can I ask, so you also incorporate a lot of seashells and beads into your work too. How do you do that? Like, how do you add them in there? Do you drill holes and sew them in, or do you glue?
So I use these gigantic industrial needles. Everything that I do is all needle and thread. So I found, I guess, back in the day when people made mattresses, they used these gigantic curved needles. So they're like 12 inches long that I can grab in my whole hand. And so, but they're still thin enough to where they can fit through the cowrie shell. And so I sew them directly on. And the ones that are hanging are just attached to thread that's dangling. Those are great questions. And I think also for me, it's a way to, boxing gloves are so little, and they really don't take up a lot of space. So by attaching them to a larger object, I'm also able to take up more space, more visual space on the gallery wall. And so I really appreciate different materials that I can start to incorporate into my work that also have meaning. And then, yeah, again, just, I mean, you can read the words on here and the lyrics on here. I'm just very into hip hop lyrics and what they mean. And so the piece on the left is from Jadena, his last album. The opening track is called Worth the Wait. And he's playing with weight as in weight, like how much something weighs. And also, you know, wait, like worth waiting for the next album, worth waiting for, you know, for freedom or whatever you have in there. And again, I talked about the formula for how much you would buy a human body in the transatlantic slave trade. So this one has 14 pounds of cowrie shells, which is about 200 pounds of human flesh, a little over 200 pounds of human flesh, which is what the average heavyweight boxer weighs. And also, if you look into the archives, when they describe the most valuable male slaves that could do the hardest work, was about that same size. So for me, I'm trying to make these historical connections. And then on the right one, you know, I got really interested in nails. And you know, with the cowrie shells, I have to stitch them in. With the nails, there's wood in the middle of the glove and I get to hammer. So it's a really fun process as an artist to do something completely different and just bash on a nail into a piece of wood to create a piece. And it's a
very long time.
Yeah, my work, each piece usually takes me about a month to complete. So I would say, you know, 40 to, it depends on the piece, 40 to 80 hours. I really don't know. I work, you know, between 5 and 8 hours every single day for the most part. And so they're completed over a really long period of time. I have a day job, and so I don't get to work until the day is over. I've had my dinner, and then I just sit down and I work through the evening for the most part. So yeah, they take a long time. And I hope it shows that you know, I'm spending a lot of time on them because of how many, like this, the gloves with the nails on it. I want to say, I think that was 15 pounds of finishing nails. So I had to keep running to the hardware store to find the same exact nail, match the same color of them to until I got the piece finished to the place that I really liked it to be finished at. And that piece, the Worth the Wait piece, I was really happy that the Monterey Museum of Art purchased that piece from me. And just this last winter, they issued, it was the cover of their member newsletter. And so, you know, kind of like as an artist, when something like that happens, you're like, okay, someone, what I'm thinking my art is about is not just in my head. For me, it kind of got validated by an institution that wants to work. And for me, it really compels me or propels me to keep working, to keep investigating how I can push my work further and further. And so I remember when I first did this one, my initial inquiry for myself was, how can I make this piece larger? Boxing gloves only take up so much space. How can I take up a larger part of the wall, but then also do something that has meaning to it? And so, yeah, adding all of the cowrie shells and having them cascade and then fall into a gigantic pile to demonstrate the weight, of what a human body was traded for, I think really, I think it solved what I was, the problem that I was trying to solve. And then I just kind of want to show you guys a quick bit of my process. So that's the piece that I just showed you. And I made this, I think, 2 days ago. So you can also see the progress. I didn't get very far on it because it's literally, you can see on the bottom, the size of the beads, they're really small. And so it's only like 2 beads at a time. I do a technique called 2-bead backstitch that I learned from a friend who's a Mardi Gras Indian, and the Mardi Gras Indians use a beading technique that comes from West Africa, but also that they learned from Native Americans.
How'd you do that?
It's just embroidery. So it's just a needle and thread, and it's just me basically doing this with the needle over and over and over and over again, adding 2 beads at a time until I cover the whole thing up.
That's amazing. You're good at that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I would say that it's a very meditative process for me. It's very calming, it's very relaxing. And then I think when I start to get towards the end of completing a piece, then I'm frustrated. Like I want it to be done and it feels like it's never going to happen. But it always happens. And yeah, more recently, I've been really interested in, again, trying to figure out how I could take up more space with the beadwork. And so I've been investigating the largest size bead that I could find, which I think these are 3/4 of an inch in size. So they're much, much larger than the ones that I normally work with. And when I was doing the jewelry work, I was not stitching, not embroidering directly to a surface. It was just the beads and the string together. So I've been investigating how I can make a larger piece, a little bit more abstract. You still see there's the boxing glove in there, but I want to just investigate the forms that I can make with the beads. And this piece is going to be hanging, so it's flat on the table right now, but when it's hanging, it's going to have different folds in it. I have to use a different string, so it's metal string. It's a metal wire that I'm weaving with, because it has to be strong enough to be able to hold the weight of these beads. This thing is really, really heavy. And so it's also kind of like a physics problem, like how much string do I have to have? How much open space can I have to let it really dangle the way that I want it to dangle without the whole thing falling apart and having beads fall all over the floor? So, I think because in the pandemic, I haven't had an art show, and I won't have another art show until 2022. I just get to experiment and see what I can do to push the material that I have chosen further and further. And then,
can I ask you, Demetri? I'm looking at your website right now, and what fascinates me is some of the things that you haven't talked about, which is you, for this one piece I'm looking at, and a few of them, it says herbs and essential oils, high conqueror powder, mirrors, frankincense, myrrh. Can you speak about that a little bit?
Yeah. So so in addition, thank you for that question, actually. So I think all the materials all the materials that I use have a history, they have a significance that all connects to my own ancestry. So my mother's family migrated to Oakland, actually from Louisiana first. That was their first stopover. And John the Conqueror root is something, in addition to hip hop, I'm really into the blues, and like the old blues from the like 1910s, 1920s. And a lot of the musicians are always talking about John the Conqueror root. So if you have an enemy, if someone's coming after you, and hoodoo traditions, you get some of this root, this knurled up root, and you carry it in a bag, and that will protect you from evil from other places and other people. And so, yeah, I incorporate those. The gloves also have to be stuffed with things. And so instead of just stuffing them with, I don't know, cloth or cotton or whatever I can find, actually I do use cotton, but I also infuse other things in there to kind of give my work another dimension, another meaning. And I don't, like the herbs and things like that, I don't disclose what those are. I'm not a voodoo practitioner or hoodoo practitioner or even a traditional healer of any kind, but I'm interested in at least taking some of that thought and infusing into the work, because for me it's very different than a Western way of going about solving problems. My work is always investigating what it is, like what my ancestors did, and not running to the doctor to solve a problem, but going to the traditional herbalist, if that makes any sense. So yeah, all the materials that I use have a significance. Sometimes it is from a Western source, so like using quartz crystal points for clarity and guidance and healing.
So is this
just pull on different things.
just like clarifying, this is like holistic medicine or alternative medicine?
It's not necessarily, it's more spiritual medicine than physical ailment medicine. So it's like, you know, if you have a problem, if you want to defeat an enemy again, High John the Conqueror, or, you know, you burn frankincense during a prayer, or you use a certain herb to have the outcome that you want to have come. So I like taking that folk, these folk medicines, but medicine is not necessarily the right term. I guess folk remedies for a spiritual or psychological problem.
Yeah.
That you would carry around with you, put in your pocket, that would help you.
You said, yeah, and you said this was from your ancestors, but you also said you were biracial. Which ancestry is this from?
This is so my family. I mean, when you go further back, we have roots to West Africa, but my family on the African American side originates in the American South. So this is, yeah, this is like, and those traditions are also a blend of Native American traditions with the African traditions. They come together, and even there's some French and English traditions that get infused in there. So it's a whole mishmash of different beliefs.
Got it.
So you have done like a lot of different types of art. Do you think that
I'm gonna end the show so I can see you.
Okay. Do you think that the art type you've landed on now is the one you're going to continue doing, or do you think you're going to continue to evolve and try different art styles and new like mediums?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I'm obsessed with beads, and I've always been obsessed with beads. My mom, you know, was a 1960s flower child and had all of these beaded necklaces and stuff that she gave me when I was in middle school. And I remember wearing them, and people were like, "Oh my God, that's so cool!" So when I was in middle school, I used to make necklaces and bracelets for my friends. So it's something that I've always been into, but I never saw it as something that you could viably make art with. And so I think once I discovered that I could, you know, make art out of something that I'm totally obsessed with, you can't see necessarily on the screen, but when you're in the presence of a glass bead, especially some of these have silver or copper infused in them, the light, the color, you know, of course I could take a paintbrush and I could try to replicate that same sense, but there's something magical about the bead for me that I'm totally obsessed with. So I doubt that I would move away from beads in the near future. I may go back to painting at some time, but I want to investigate how far I can push beads before I even consider going to something else.
Do you have any advice for people who are struggling to find kind of their big artistic interest?
Wow, that is an amazing question. I think just investigate. I think figure out, for me, it was figuring out what I was interested in. And, you know, I was always looking back at books to see, you know, particularly traditional West African beadwork. When Black Panther, the movie, came out, and, you know, then I found out that the costume designer was super inspired by traditional Filipino costumes and cloth and beadwork, then I was just like, oh my gosh, I should be looking deeper into that as well. So just whatever, I think what I found is like artists who are, you have to love the medium that you choose. Like Mr. Tracy loves painting. He paints more than anyone that I know. And it's just like, if you love that material, then that's the right material for you. Like if you love pencil, go for that. If photography gets you excited. And I think there's so many artists that push it. Like I found out this artist, Liza Liu, who I think she spent 10 or 12 years creating an entire kitchen out of beads. And for me, it was just like, wow, can I push this tiny little glass bead into something like that, where you know, she was talking about the labor of women's work, which the kitchen represents, and laboriously creating a kitchen. Like even the plates and the knives are made out of beads. So it's like, how can I, I'm obsessed with this material because it's beautiful. I love it. It connects to my ancestry. But then the next step is like, how can I push this further and further? How can I create something out of it that no one else has done yet? And so for me, that's the investigation, that I probably won't move away from it because I don't think I'll ever solve that problem. I'll never come up with, you know, the work that is like, okay, this is the be all end all. I can never do something further with beads. And for me, it's like, I've been working with these microscopic tiny beads. I've recently moved to the much larger beads. And, you know, I've even started to think about like, well, maybe I can take, when the pandemic is over, I would love to take a trip to Japan to investigate, you know, how beads are made there. I'd love to go to Czech Republic. Maybe I can make my own beads. Maybe these 3/4 inch beads are not the limit. If I could make my own, you know, I can make them even larger. What could I do with them? And what would it take to weave those together? Because even the metal, the steel wire that I'm using to weave with right now wouldn't be strong enough. So, you know, that there's always a problem to solve.